The phone was already in his hand before I finished the sentence. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not what I said, I'll get to that, but how fast he moved. Like he'd been waiting for me to make a mistake he could report. The kitchen still smelled like the pork and sauerkraut I'd made for supper, and the kerosene lamp on the table was doing that thing where the flame leans sideways when someone opens a door too fast. He didn't open a door. He picked up the phone. The one mounted on the wall by the pantry. The black one with the cord that had been chewed by the cat we weren't supposed to have. And he dialed the bishop's number from memory. 7 digits. No pause. I stood there with my hands still wet from the dishes, and the water ran down my wrists and dripped onto the floor, and I watched each drop hit the linoleum like it mattered. Like counting the drops was the only thing keeping me in my body. I was 22. No, I'd just turned 23. My birthday was the week before, and nobody had said anything about it, which was fine, which was normal, which was, I need you to hear this, which was the way things were. I asked my husband for space, not for a divorce, not for freedom, not even for a night alone. I said, I think I need a little room to breathe. 8 words. He heard something else entirely, and by 9:15 that evening, the bishop was at our kitchen table, and I was being asked to explain what I meant by space. I was 23 years old, and I didn't have an answer, because I didn't have the word yet for the thing I was drowning in. Quick pause. My name is Esther, and this is Quiet Leaving. If these stories stay with you, if they make you feel less alone, subscribe. It's free, and it's the reason I can keep telling them. Tell me in the comments, was there ever a moment you asked for something so small it should have been invisible, and it set your whole world on fire? And if you want to go further, a super chat or a membership, that's you telling me these voices are worth hearing. That keeps this going. Now, back to what happened. There's a rule in communities like the one I grew up in, and nobody ever speaks it out loud. That's how you know it's the most important one. The rule is this: a wife does not create distance. Not physical distance, not emotional distance, not even the kind of distance where you're quiet for too long at the supper table and someone notices. Distance is disobedience. Distance is the first crack in the wall, and if the elders see a crack, they come to fill it. Not with understanding, but with scripture and correction and the weight of every woman who came before you, who learned to stay close and stay quiet. I remember sitting in my Aunt Leah's kitchen when I was maybe 14, and she was peeling apples with that paring knife that had the loose handle, the one wrapped in black electrical tape. And I asked her, I don't even know why, I asked her if she ever wanted to go somewhere alone. Just alone. She put the knife down and looked at me like I'd said something in a language she didn't recognize. She didn't answer. She picked the knife back up and kept peeling. That silence was the rule. That silence was the whole curriculum. And it wasn't just the big things. It was the way my mother always sat within arm's reach of my father at every gathering. Not because she wanted to, but because the alternative was a conversation she didn't want to have with the deacon's wife on Monday. It was the way my older sister Ruth stopped going on walks by herself after she got married because her mother-in-law mentioned it to the minister's wife, who mentioned it to the minister, who mentioned it to Ruth's husband Amish, who mentioned it to Ruth at bedtime in a voice she described to me once as, not angry, just disappointed, which was worse. I almost asked Ruth what she meant by worse. I had the question right there on my tongue, sitting behind my teeth. But I was 17, and I was engaged, and I was 3 months away from becoming someone's wife. And there was a part of me, the smart part, the survival part, that knew if I pulled that thread, I'd unravel something I wasn't ready to see. So I nodded, and I let the thread stay. I met Eli at a singing, that's what we called them, the Sunday night gatherings where the young people would come together, and the hymns were just the excuse, really. He was sitting on the bench closest to the wood stove, and his boots were muddy, and he hadn't cleaned them. And I remember thinking that was either brave or careless, and I couldn't decide which. He had this way of holding his hymnal, loose, almost like he might drop it, and he sang quietly, not to be heard, just to be part of it. I liked that about him. I liked that he didn't perform. He asked to drive me home in his buggy that night, and I said yes, and his horse was a chestnut mare named Ada, who kept turning her head to look at me like she was making sure I was good enough. Eli was kind. I need you to know that. He brought me wildflowers wrapped in newspaper. He carved a wooden box for my birthday, sanded it so smooth I couldn't find a single rough edge. He was 21. I always mix that up because he looked so young. He looked like a boy pretending to be old enough for all of this. My sister Ruth pulled me aside 3 weeks before the wedding. We were hanging laundry, the white sheets, the ones Mama bleached with that lye soap that turned your knuckles raw. And Ruth grabbed my wrist and said, "It'll hurt the first time. Just breathe through it." That was it. That was everything she gave me. 13 words if you count the contraction as one. I waited for more. I waited for her to explain what it was, what breathe through it meant, what I was supposed to do with my body or my fear or the questions I'd been swallowing since I was old enough to notice that married women moved differently than unmarried ones. Heavier somehow, like they were carrying something invisible. But Ruth just squeezed my wrist and went back to the sheets. And I stood there with the wind pulling at my dress and the clothespin digging into my palm, and I thought, 13 words. That's all the map I get. The wedding was in November. I remember because the ground was already hard, and the light through the windows of the house where we held the service had that thin gray quality that makes everything look like a photograph of itself. We sat on wooden chairs facing each other. That's how it's done. And Bishop Troyer read from scripture, and I couldn't hear him. I could see his mouth moving, but all I could hear was my own pulse in my ears, and the sound of Eli's boot tapping against the floor, just barely. A rhythm that wasn't a rhythm, just nerves. He wouldn't look at me. He was staring at a point somewhere above my head, and his jaw was working, clenching and unclenching. And I thought, this is his fear. He has his own version of this. We ate dinner with 200 people and smiled, and I cut the cake with a knife that had been in his mother's family for 4 generations, and the handle was cold in my hand, and my hand was cold inside my body, and everything was cold except the room, which was too warm, which smelled like roast chicken and bread and bodies pressed together, singing songs about God's plan for man and wife. That night, the room upstairs in his parents' house where we'd live until our own place was ready, a quilt his grandmother made, the double wedding ring pattern, blue and cream, and one corner was frayed where the stitching had come loose. Kerosene lamp on the dresser, his boots by the door, placed neatly this time. My dress hung on a peg, and I was in the nightgown Mama sewed. White cotton, long sleeves, buttons all the way to the collar. I could hear his parents' clock downstairs. Every second. Eli stood by the window with his back to me, and his hands were at his sides, and they were opening and closing, like he was trying to hold on to something that wasn't there. Neither of us moved. The lamp made our shadows too big for the room. He turned around. He said, "I don't," and then stopped. He tried again. "Should I?" and stopped again. I didn't know what to say, because I didn't know what came next. Not really. Not the mechanics of it, not the order, not what was supposed to happen or feel like, or how long it would take, or whether I was allowed to say stop. That word, stop, I didn't know it was mine. I didn't know it existed in that room, in that context, between a husband and a wife on their wedding night. He came closer. He sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped, and I slid toward him slightly, and my whole body went rigid. Not because of him, not because he was frightening, but because every nerve I had was firing at once, and I had no framework for any of it. He put his hand on my arm. I flinched. He pulled back. I said, "No, it's fine, I'm fine." I wasn't fine, but I didn't have another option, not in my vocabulary, not in anything anyone had ever taught me. And then... Sorry, give me a second. The thing is, what happened next wasn't violent. It wasn't cruel. It was two people in the dark doing something neither of them understood, following instructions nobody had given them, trying to perform an act that was supposed to be sacred, but felt like stumbling through a room with no light and no map and no language. It hurt, not the way Ruth said, not the kind you breathe through, a different kind. The kind where your body says no, and your mind says this is what's supposed to happen, and you go somewhere else inside yourself. You go to the sound of the clock, to the pattern on the quilt, to the place where you count the seconds until it's over. And he, Eli, he didn't know. He didn't know I was gone. He didn't know there was a version of this where I was supposed to be present, where it was supposed to feel like something I chose. He was as lost as I was. When it was over, he rolled onto his back and stared at the ceiling and said, Did I? And didn't finish. I said, yes. I didn't know what I was saying yes to. I just knew that was the word that ended conversations. I lay there afterward and listened to him fall asleep. It happened fast, maybe 10 minutes, and I was jealous of that. I was jealous that his body could just let go. I looked at the quilt, the loose thread in the corner. I reached down and pulled it, slowly, and I felt the stitching give, just a little, and I thought about pulling it all the way out, unraveling the whole thing, taking it apart seam by seam. I didn't. I let go. I folded my hands over my stomach and I stared at the ceiling, and I cataloged every sensation in my body, like I was taking inventory of something that had been rearranged without my permission. That's the thing nobody tells you. You don't feel broken right away. You feel rearranged, like someone moved all the furniture in your house 1 inch to the left, and now you keep bumping into things that used to be familiar. Here's what neither of us knew. Neither of us knew there was supposed to be a conversation. Neither of us knew that what I felt, the rigidity, the flinching, the leaving my own body, those weren't signs that I was being dramatic or difficult or insufficiently faithful. Those were my body doing exactly what a body does when it hasn't been prepared, hasn't consented in any way that means anything, hasn't been given the basic biological information that any human being deserves before another human being enters them. Eli didn't know about any of that either. He'd gotten his own version of Ruth's 13 words, probably from a brother or a cousin, probably mumbled over farm work, probably something like, "She might cry, that's normal." The community didn't withhold this information because they were cruel. That's what makes it worse. They withheld it because they believed ignorance was protection. They believed that if you didn't name the body's needs, those needs wouldn't exist. And they were wrong. They were so deeply, generationally, structurally wrong that by the time I learned the word arousal, not the feeling, just the word, I was 27 years old and married for 4 years. And I didn't know that what I'd been experiencing every single time wasn't how it was supposed to feel. He wasn't trying to hurt me. I need you to hear that. He wasn't cruel, and he wasn't rough, and he wasn't indifferent. He was a man working from the same blank page I was. And that blankness, that's not a personal failure. That's a system that decided two people's most intimate moments should be built on silence. And the silence did what silence always does. It made harm feel like love. So I learned to manage it. That's what you do. You don't call it surviving. You don't call it coping, you just call it Tuesday. You call it marriage. I learned to time things. I learned that if I kept the lamp off, I could go further away inside my head. I learned that if I thought about the garden, specifically the row of snap peas I'd planted along the south fence, the way the tendrils curled around the wire like tiny green fingers holding on, I could be somewhere else entirely while my body stayed in that bed. I developed a system. Wednesdays and Saturdays. Don't ask me why. I think he had his own pattern, his own internal calendar, and I just learned to read it the way you learn to read weather. The pressure drops, the air changes, you know what's coming. And I'd prepare. Not my body, nobody taught me how to do that, but my mind. I'd pick a place to go. The creek behind my parents' farm where the water ran over those flat gray stones. The smell of my mother's bread on Thursday mornings. The sound Ada made when Eli brushed her. That soft, woofing exhale through her nose. I had a whole library of places to disappear to. That was my gift to myself. And isn't that something? I thought I was being clever. I thought I'd figured it out. I didn't know there was a word for what I was doing. I didn't know dissociation was a thing with a name, and a clinical definition, and a chapter in a textbook somewhere that described exactly what the girl in that bed was doing with her mind while her body stayed behind. There was a quilting circle every other Thursday at Hannah Yoder's house. Hannah was 10 years older than me, married at 19, 5 children by 27, and she had this way of pressing her lips together when certain topics came up. Not a frown, just a seal, like she was physically closing a door. I was piecing together a log cabin quilt, the red and cream one I never finished, and it was just me and Hannah and a woman named Sarah who'd married into the community from a neighboring district. And Sarah said something. She said, "Does anyone else just go somewhere else during?" She said it to her fabric. She didn't look up. Her needle kept moving, and Hannah's hands stopped just for a second, maybe 2 seconds. And then they started again, and she said, "The coffee's getting cold, should I put more on?" And that was it. That was the whole conversation. But I saw Hannah's hands stop. I saw the 2 seconds, and I knew. I knew Sarah wasn't the only one, and I wasn't the only one. And Hannah, with her 5 children and her pressed-together lips, wasn't the only one. We were all going somewhere else. We were all building libraries in our heads. And nobody, not one of us, had the language to say it out loud because the language didn't exist in our world. The word for what we needed hadn't been let in past the fence line. Sarah stopped coming to Quilting Circle after that. Her husband told Hannah's husband that Sarah was struggling with contentment, which is the way they say it, the way they wrap a woman's pain in language that makes it her fault. I heard later that the bishop visited Sarah's home. I heard she apologized. I don't know what she apologized for. I think she apologized for the 2 seconds of honesty at a quilting circle on a Thursday afternoon. And that thought, I still can't sit with it for too long. It burns. By our 3rd year of marriage, I had a daughter, Leah, named after my aunt with the paring knife. And I looked at Leah, this tiny, furious, red-faced creature who screamed when she was hungry, and screamed when she was tired, and screamed when she wanted to be held, and I thought, she knows how to ask for what she needs. She came into the world knowing. And I thought, when does she stop? When do they teach her to stop? I found the word on a Tuesday. I remember because Eli had taken the buggy to the hardware store in town, and I walked to the small library on Mill Street, the one with the green door and the bench outside that always had bird droppings on the left side. And I wasn't looking for anything. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't on a mission. I wasn't brave. I was just tired, and the library was quiet, and quiet was something I could never get enough of. I picked up a magazine, I don't even remember which one, and there was an article about women's health, and in the middle of a paragraph I'll never forget, I read the word consent. Not in a legal context, not in a dramatic context. in the context of a woman's body and what she was allowed to want and refuse and feel. And my hands started shaking. Right there at the table by the window with the sun coming through and the librarian stamping books at the desk and a kid reading in the corner. My hands shook so hard I put the magazine down and pressed my palms flat against the table, and I held them there until the wood grain left marks on my skin. Because that word, that single word, it named something. It named the thing that had been missing from every Wednesday, every Saturday, every night in that bed with the quilt and the kerosene lamp and the clock ticking downstairs. Nobody had ever told me I was allowed to say no. But more than that, and this is what broke me, nobody had ever told me I was allowed to say yes. Real yes. Yes that meant something. Yes that came from wanting, not from obligation. Yes that involved my body as something that belonged to me. I wasn't angry. I think people expect you to be angry, and maybe I should have been, and maybe I will be someday. But in that moment, sitting in that library, I was sad. I was so sad I couldn't breathe. I was sad for the girl who stood in that kitchen with wet hands, watching water drip onto linoleum. I was sad for her on her wedding night, going to the creek inside her mind. I was sad for Hannah and Sarah and Ruth and my mother and Eli's mother and every woman who built a library in her head because the real world didn't have room for her to exist as a full person. And I was sad for Eli. That's the thing nobody tells you. I was sad for my husband, who was taught that a wife's silence was the same as permission, who was never told that the woman lying next to him had left the room, who would have been horrified. I believe this. I have to believe this, if he'd understood what was happening. We were both cheated. The silence cheated us both. But it cheated me more. I need to say that. It cheated me more because it was my body. And that's not a thing you can split evenly. I tried to explain it to a coworker once, years later, after I'd left. We were on a lunch break, and she asked me about growing up Amish, and I tried to explain what it's like to not know you have a right to your own body until you're 27 years old. And she stared at me with this look. Not cruel, not dismissive, just blank. Like I was describing a color she'd never seen. She said, "But didn't you just know? Like, instinctively?" And I wanted to laugh and cry at the same time because no, you don't just know. You know what you're taught. You know what you're shown. You know what the world around you makes possible. And when the world around you has no word for consent and no concept of a woman's desire and no framework for a body that belongs to itself, you don't know. You build a library in your head, and you go there, and you call it normal. And that is the loneliest sentence I've ever said out loud. But here's what I won't do. I won't pretend it was all dark, because it wasn't. And if I tell you it was, I'm lying. And I promised myself when I started this that I wouldn't lie. The community gave me things I still carry. The sound of 100 voices singing in German on a Sunday morning. Not performing, not amplifying, just singing because singing was prayer, and prayer was breathing, and breathing was the simplest thing we shared. I carry that. I hear it sometimes when I'm driving alone, and the road is empty, and the sky is doing that thing where it's not quite sunset, but the light turns everything gold. And I carry the bread, my mother's bread. The way the kitchen smelled on Thursday morning when she'd been up since 4 and the loaves were cooling on wire racks and she'd tear the end off one and hand it to me with butter so fresh it was still white. And I'd eat it standing at the counter with my bare feet on the cold floor and nothing in my life since has ever tasted like that. And I carry the silence. Not the harmful silence, the other one. The one at dawn, when the world is just horses breathing and frost on the fence posts, and your own heartbeat in your ears, and you feel so small and so held at the same time. I miss that. I am homesick for a place that hurt me. And I don't know what to do with that except hold it with both hands and let it be true. The harm was real. The harm was silence dressed up as holiness. The harm was two people in a dark room with no language and no map and a system that called their blindness God's design. But the beauty was real too, and I won't choose. I won't let anyone make me choose. I am building a life that holds both, the bread and the silence, the singing and the grief, the love I have for a place that didn't love me back the way I needed. And some days, that's enough. And some days, I pull at the loose thread and I want to unravel the whole thing. But I don't. I let it be. If you grew up somewhere your body was kept from you like something dangerous, if you were handed a life without anyone asking whether you wanted it, I see you. If you're still inside it right now, folding laundry, reading this on a phone you're not supposed to have, I see you. If you left and the guilt still wakes you up at 3 in the morning, I see you. If you're lying next to someone right now and you just realized you've been going to the library in your head, I see you. If you asked for space and the whole world came down on you for it, I see you. Wherever you are in this, I see you, and you are not alone. Leave me a comment. Tell me what you felt listening to this. Tell me the moment that caught you, the sentence where your breath changed. There is so much more I haven't said yet. I'm just getting started. There are stories I haven't been brave enough to tell, but I'm getting closer. If you're new here, this is Quiet Leaving, and I'd love for you to stay. Subscribe. Not for me, for the next woman whose story needs a place to land. And to the members and Super Chat family, you're the reason the next story gets told. If you want to be part of that, the door is always open. Your body was always yours. It still is.